Welcome to Oxford. My name is Deborah Pout. I'm founder of the Oxford Media Network, and we're here for the panel Failures in Government Approaches to Internet Policy and the Consequent Potential for Increased Violence and Radicalisation. We're incredibly lucky to have two brilliant speakers for this session. I'm going to introduce them. To my left is Dr. William Morris, who is Secretary General of the Next Century Foundation, a charity dedicated to conflict resolution that was originally established to work on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The foundation now has since widened its scope of work and does work on informal second-track diplomacy to avoid war, de-escalate existing conflicts, and to promote freedom from fear and want and freedom of speech and worship, and works internationally, is doing work on the Ukraine-Russia conflict and widely in the Middle East. And to my right is Paul Guttridge, who is at the Department of Theology and Religion, an honorary fellow at the Edward Cadbury Centre, University of Birmingham. He's the former National Director of Initiatives of Change UK, and he's doing some, I can say, groundbreaking work on the ground. He's a facilitator between outright actors and the state. And I hope we're going to get some very interesting perspectives from on the ground. So really, both these speakers are not, they have on the ground experience. And I think that's what's going to make this session so interesting and fruitful. So can I invite the first speaker?
Well, thank you, Debbie. I'm just to say, well, I suppose I'm the passionate, you're the wisdom in this conversation, because I really, the whole business of the way we're going with internet policy disturbs me a little, and I just want to try and touch a few things in my own experience. I mean, I first encountered internet experience when I was standing as police commissioner in Southwest Devon and Cornwall. I stood as an independent because I'd fallen out with Labour, and I stood it anyway. I stood lost, but that's not the point. What was very interesting was the phenomena, because social media was vital and critically important. Facebook at that time was a major platform, less so now, but at that time it was a major platform among the young, and the abuse you got on Facebook was quite savage, particularly from the right wing, largely because of policies that I might have advocated over drugs or immigration or whatever. But the point is not my policies. It wouldn't have mattered so much what I was, what was the nature of the abuse. And it was mostly from people you might think neo-Nazi, extreme right, but there were motorbike guys, there were all sorts. Now, the easy peasy lemon squeezy way of dealing with it, of course, is just to blank them, which you can do on Facebook. Just take them off if you're on a fan page, which is what you're talking about here. And that you can do, but we only did that in extreme circumstances, when the language, we didn't do it for death threats. We did it for obscene, really obscene language that was really offensive. Why? Because we'd rather engage with them and talk to them and let them let off steam. And that's really the nub of my principal concern about government policy and the way we're going, and these frightened politicians who are trying to suppress anybody that goes over the edge. And what do? You put a lid on a pressure cooker. And I think there's a real danger in that for our society, for our world, as far as the way we're going. And when you drive them, you drive them into what the guys in this conference like to call non-flop platforms that are under the wire that have less than 10% or whatever. And some countries have been extremely effective at crushing the internet. Netherlands have done very well. Netherlands, where racism is off the scale, where hatred is, you know what it's like in Netherlands? I mean, they have some good prison policies. Their prisons aren't too full, but in terms of a failed society, an utterly racist society imbued with right-wing extremism, Netherlands is classic. And yet, oh, they're doing well controlling the internet. Well, good luck. I mean, I think we have a problem. Up to a point, we're living in a more racist society, and up to a point, I would put that down partly, at least, to changes in government policy years back. And I'll be very subjective here. I think that there was a major failure with Tony Blair when he introduced his multicultural approach and he introduced religious schools. And I think that that was a problem. I mean, I went to secondary school with Hindus, with Muslims, in a mixed community in London. Well, secondary school, college. I was in what was called Westminster College. You had everybody there from all walks of life. I think there is greater segregationalism in education. Now, the plus side is that we haven't seen terrorists coming out of segregated Muslim schools by and large. That has not been a phenomenon. What is more of a phenomenon, though, is I believe that once you remove the minorities from the white schools, you are encouraging white extremism. You're encouraging, in cities like Birmingham, if you have too much, you take the Muslims out of the schools and put them into Muslim schools, then I believe we are failing our younger generation. It's my opinion. I'm a great advocate of the ideology of, well, Kwame Appiah, I regard as the greatest living philosopher. He's an American Ghanaian, and he believes in cosmopolitanism as opposed to multiculturalism. So he believes in the ideology where you're inclusive, but you keep your own identity. So you're a Muslim, but you don't have segregated schools. He does not believe in segregation. He believes in a kind of, well, the Khalil Gibran, I suppose, approach, which is a world without frontiers, ultimately. It's true internationalism, but with respecting your identity and keeping your identity, but in a community. And that kind of ideology I find much more attractive than cosmopolitanism, or its opposite, segregationalism, which, opposite of cosmopolitan, no, not talking about segregation, integrationalism. So you have two approaches, don't you, in the world? You have the cosmopolitan approach of Britain, the integrationalist approach of France, where everybody has to be. They're actually taking down some poor, pathetic French city in southern France, having taken down a statue of the Virgin Mary because it's too religious, which makes me smile. I think there are a lot of failures with regard to policy. Failures, and I jump around here, but prisons. I used to be a prison visitor for many years, and the problem with prisons with free associations, we have young offenders units now in prisons. The old Borstal system is gone decades and decades ago, and has been replaced with the idea that you put children into adult jails. And that's what we do today. We put them in adult jails, in young offenders units, with free association. Gypsies can't stand it. They usually commit suicide. But the suicide rate is massive. And we put children into jails instead of into Borstals. Borstals were bad. Farm schools were nothing like as bad as the current obscene policy that we have now for dealing with young offenders. And of course, it also, with free associations, a lot of intimidation. I used to visit on the wings because I couldn't actually manage did visit with the young offenders because I found it just too soul destroying. Because they were either bragging it up and being tough, or they were frightened and fearful. And association is on young offenders' wings is horrible. But the point is,
failures, governance.
yeah, well, no, I said
and
failures in the internet
internet.
policy. Debbie, the chairman's bringing me back to the point. The point is that the whole prevent system and so on is, in my way of thinking, not fit for purpose. Yeah, come back. She's quite rightly bringing me back onto focus. The terrorists, of course, will be driven down. We've had great success in driving ISIS out of the mainstream platforms. But mind you, it's easy for them. I mean, you use the old ISIS hashtags, and you can still find stuff on smaller platforms. We, for a while at the Next Century Foundation, we decided to try and use an ideology to fight an ideology. So we established, it's still got, I think, 500,000 followers or something, a Facebook platform called Kawata. Kawata means reflections. We did it off our own bat, and we based it on inclusivity and standards of that kind. And it got a massive following, and then we sought government funding for it. Of course, it was impossible. The State Department were going to fund it, US State Department. But then we went to Washington, we had meetings with them, and then they put their bottom line rule. You can never, it's fine, we'll fund you, but you must never discuss Israel or Palestine or the United States of America. Come on, you're trying to do a counter extremist. You can't, these are forbidden. So anyway, we scrapped it, and we scrapped the idea of any funding for it. I know over time that faded away, but we need an ideology to fight an ideology. If you're going to fight extremism, it's no good driving it down. The danger, you get me, is that if you drive extremism off the major platforms, then you drive it into the shadows. And what's it going to do? It's going to explode eventually. It will come out because people are angry. You're not going to give people a chance to express that anger. And people are genuinely angry. They're going into this winter with fuel poverty, seeing migrants from Ukraine taking homes that they cannot get, and they are angry. People are angry. And in this country, that anger will explode at some time. And if you drive them off the internet, if you drive the racists off the internet, if you drive the angry extremists off the internet, where are they going? I mean, they're going to go to the streets eventually. And the best case scenario is you get another Nigel Farage emerging in British politics with major support. But the worst case scenario, I dread to think. And we have a history, don't we, in this country? We had the Bristol riots. You're too young to remember them, but Paul will tell you about them. I mean, they were awful. And I think there is a danger. There's also a danger with the obsession with dealing with misinformation. Now, your cousin Jackie, Veronica, lives in Oxford. She's an anti-vaxxer, and she believes the whole world is controlled by pedophiles. My cousin Katie lives in America and believes much the same thing. And you get these people. So, but why does it start? It starts, I mean, we had this COVID issue. And where did COVID come from? It comes from China and in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's like saying, okay, so if COVID had emerged in Portendown in Britain or Maryland in where the Chemical Research Institute, Weapons Research Institute in the United States is housed, then you'd have suspicions. But none of us have any suspicions over COVID emerging in China. So what does that do? It makes for people, I mean, Trump says it's China, and then they think, oh, well, the journalists are wrong. The journalists aren't addressing the issue. People have a sense of kind of natural what is right and what is wrong, and they start going down there's a hole in the information they're getting, and so they fill the hole with their own crazy theories. And that's what I believe is happening, has happened with the emergence of this lunatic fringe. And this lunatic fringe is extremely dangerous. It's not just my cousin Jackie in Oxford or my cousin Katie in the United States who are anti-vaxxers. Those anti-vaxxers join in Germany with members from the armed forces and others, and they become a real dangerous force. And in a country like Germany, which has a major right-wing edge, and it's a right-wing edge, most of the right-wing ringers, it's always a history to this thing. But I mean, the right-wingers many of them come from East Germany. They feel impoverished when West Germany took over, and there's a lot of, without going into all that backstory. But the point is that the internet is their territory. And you can deal with them in the internet if you reply to them on the internet, and if you put up you use an ideology of inclusivity to fight an ideology of hatred. But to suppress the internet is, in my view, what we've been doing. And we need a kind of climate of compassion. We need a climate of love. We need a climate of understanding for those that feel hatred, because people feel hatred for a reason. They're kind of driven to it in their despair. So whatever, I mean, Debbie was talking to me about some group I'd never heard of who are now responsible for the Plymouth shooting. What do you call them?
Incels.
Incels. Well, that means celibate blokes who nobody loves. They've got they're on the internet in a category all of themselves. I mean, a lot of these people that start, and that was the Plymouth shooter, was an incel boy. You know, the one who shot all those kids in tragedy. The point is, a lot of this hatred is from people that don't have another way of expressing themselves. And I am deeply concerned with the kind of direction that's being advocated in many of the sessions of this conference, which is control. And I'm not sure that control is the answer to the problems of the internet. So thank you. That's my submission.
If Paul could go now.
Well, thanks for pitching up on a Saturday afternoon when blood sugar levels are dropping. So let's try and get let's see if we can be a little bit provocative. So my name's Paul, and I'm a middle-aged white man from a working class council estate until I was 17. And I'm not going to mention names. Maybe if there's a non-recorded part, I can be a bit more open. My role basically is I operate as a practitioner. So I sit in the hinterland between people who are known right-wing activists, neo-Nazis in the UK, paedophile hunters, and I broker conversations with state actors, security services, police, politicians. And so I feel reasonably well positioned to talk about what it feels like on the ground, having come from the estates. I was brought up during the race riots in Bristol in the late 70s and into the early 80s, and could very easily have become a racist myself. Of course, I will have unconscious bias, and that's something that people like myself have to be confronted with every so often when you think, gosh, I didn't even know I thought like that and behaved like that. That happens. I have met some of those people who you would have come across online. And where I want to go in my presentation is I want to start off with some statistics, ways in which the US and the UK are responding to hate crime online, some of the attitudes that people have, and I'll drop some figures. Then I want to share some field notes, the conversations I'm having in basements in various parts of the UK, in the backs of vans on wherever I go, with people who hold some seriously unsavory views on Black women, Muslims, Jews, white women, anything other than themselves generally. And what's driving that? And what do I see as some of the emergent themes coming through? And then just pop some ideas out there on actually, what could we possibly do as next steps? What's driving this? What could be some practical things that we could do in terms of dealing with what we see online, but also understanding there are human beings that are doing this online, and they also have offline lives as well. And sometimes it's pretty porous, the membrane actually between their on and offline persona. And the fact when we come to the question section, if you've got some, that there's some pretty sophisticated intellectual thinking and long form writing taking place that is informing much of what we would deem as the white knuckle dragon males, who were the troops on the front line, whether they're the keyboard warrior types or whether they're outside galvanizing and recruiting people. And COVID has been an absolute gift to the alt-right. And I use the word alt-right, alternative right, rather than far right. And you can ask me about why that's important, but sometimes defining and getting the semantics right is really, really helpful. So here's some stats from Pew Research in 2017 and Ofcom research in 2018 around how people like you and I, members of the public, users of the internet, what we think about hate speech and what we think should be done about it online. So here goes. If you're note taking, let me put my specs on. So some useful stats on internet hate. Pew in 2017. Of the folk polled in the US, when they said, what should we do about online hate? 45% were more concerned with protecting free speech. 55% said, actually, we should put internet safety before free speech. So you can see there's a division in this advanced Western democracy. And I think the stats play out similar over here in the UK. It's interesting, of what is deemed as hate speech, 73% of 18 to 29-year-old men think that offensive material is taken too seriously and we don't need to do anything about it. 79% actually think that the platforms themselves should take responsibility and do something with it. But interestingly, 63% of those people who polled said, we see harassment as a problem. What the blazes do we take from that? It's a mess, it's a mix. But what we can take from it is people, men in particular, don't see it as such an issue. And when you see the rise in extremism, particularly on the alt-right, it's that age group which is being recruited very quickly. And in fact, in some of the work that I've been doing almost underground and sometimes underground, we're seeing a massive resurgence of people having body art, swastika tattoos on their bodies, initiation into drug gangs. Not that they know what it means, but the money is fueling some very organized criminal networks, which also have more than just a glancing sympathy to neo-Nazism across Europe. So we're beginning to see a small growth of an army of individuals who are now prepared to use violence, albeit connected to drugs, and actually find a home in the alt-right sphere, and then being informed by what they see online. Now, in 2018, Ofcom did some really interesting research, and basically they were saying that 50% of people who use the internet are now concerned that there is an increase in hate speech and radicalization. 49% see that this has a direct impact on people's behavior, and 59% of people are saying we just ignore it because we don't know what to do with it. Of the 10 most significant alt-right activists online globally, 5 of them are in the UK. So we're seeing a massive growth. 50% of the most significant alt-right and far-right agitators and populists are based in the UK. everybody has the sense, particularly within government, that this should be somebody else's to sort out. Government should not sort this out. We've had the prevent strategy, all that kind of stuff. But overwhelmingly, governments want to outsource this phenomena to other players. That's a real tension, because how do we govern it? So when I'm out on the ground, what does that mean on the ground? And then what can we do about it? So I get to talk to people who have these unsavory opinions. And part of my role is to be a bit like a midwife. Basically, I'm trying to get something birth, play with a metaphor here, birth positive. And I just try and bring people into rooms in informal settings where people can have the kinds of conversations that can never be tolerated in the public square, that often happen online, and get people to meet face to face. These are the themes that I think are coming through. Number one, there's a genuine feel of what I call, and what's being voiced as the illiberal liberals. This is driving some of the hate that we're seeing online and in the public square. And the illiberal liberals go something like this. Liberalism means that everybody's got the rights. Everybody has rights, and everybody has rights and freedoms to be and say and be protected on all those wonderful things. But we, as the white folk, feel left behind because we are not a protected characteristic. And actually, we want to say some stuff. And when we say some stuff, we're shut down, which then leads to the second thing, which is what I call those who have legitimate questions, who now in a liberal context, which they deem as illiberal, means that they can't ask those questions publicly because they are seen as unpalatable to ask. So what's happening is you have people with legitimate questions who were on the margins now being moved down the pipeline into illegitimate contexts where their legitimate questions can be asked. And because the key word here is emotion, because you've got the emotional acceptance, read any of Robert Cialdini's work on influence and persuasion, the cognitive theory on how we get sticky on an idea. When there's emotion involved, people start to buy into something that they may, up to that point, not have bought into. So you've got the illiberal liberalism, you've got legitimate questions now being asked in illegitimate context, which leads to increasing chances of radicalization or normalization of stuff. And you've got a recipe for potential disaster. The other themes that are coming through is not just around fake news. Fake news is an obvious one. The more worrying one for me is the selective reporting within what they perceive as mainstream media. So when raids are done on different far-right activist homes, they are they're reading all the mainstream publications, and the framing that they're using to understand why isn't this being reported, because we've had this march, this has happened, this is not being looked at in my locality. Why are the mainstream media actually not focusing on this? And they would say it's because of a divide and conquer approach of the elites. So I sat in a room with a number of activists and gang members, some from the far right, others represented by all different groups. And I said, who is the most marginalized in this room? And they all were, apparently. And I am as well. You know, I think, well, I'm going to put my hand up. I'm going to be marginalized as well. They all were. And I said, it's impossible for you to be equally marginalized. And I said, so what's the deal? And what was really interesting that emerged is they now believe that the elites are creating divisions within communities, black v white, Jew v Muslim, whatever segregation, whatever label, LGBTQ, whatever label, the elites are saying, hey, Mr. White guy, you don't like a black person, do you? Well, yeah, I do. That's what they're telling me. I don't fundamentally believe all that I'm being told, by the way, but these are my field notes. And they're saying, you're organizing hatred between groups that have lived in perfect harmony on a council estate. I lived on a council estate for the first 17 years of my life. You hate each other. No, we don't. No, we're telling you hate each other, and it's all whipped up in the media. But what they believe is happening is that the media is orchestrating, the elites are orchestrating hatred on the ground between groups that don't really hate each other. But because we're not allowed to talk the way we talked, they say anymore, that now it's classed as hate. When what's really happening is the greatest transfer of wealth to the elites in living history. So then comes out all the conspiracy theories. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's playing out online and it's playing out in conversation. So those are just some of the field notes. I could talk for ages on this. It's absolutely fascinating as you hear all the themes coming through. So what could we do about it? Well, let's put it bluntly. The far right, when it comes to the internet, have much funnier memes. That might be a very controversial thing to say, but they know they do, and they're really good at creating them. They are funny memes. And I think those of us who are more pluralistic, maybe to the left, more inclusive, cosmopolitan, whatever, we need to use a bit more humor to have a counter narrative to the far right. The far right is not all serious. They are using a lot of humor. And why? Because they also understand that humor attacks emotion, and emotion creates stickiness. And they're appealing to emotion. And also, we need, I think, a hybrid approach, because I don't think we can wait for government to legislate fully. And I don't think we can necessarily trust that actual big social media platforms are going to make decisions that ultimately, whether we like it or not, are driven by the bottom line. And the bottom line is driven by traffic and advertising. So the reason why people get kicked off LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, or Twitter in particular, might not be because they say something bad. It might be because what they say that is bad is stopping people investing. There's lots of bad things that are said online, but those people are still on there, but it's not affected the bottom line. So we've actually got to say, actually, how do we create a groundswell? How do we influence policymakers? And I know people who ran Prevent and they're offhanders to the MI5. I know these people, and there you can see the intent and you can see the difficulty. So we need a hybrid approach where actually we start to generate the kind of media and content which attacks people's emotions as well. I also think that we need to, and I'll wrap up in 2 ticks, we need to create safe enough, not safe, but safe enough spaces for the online warriors to become offline and begin to have a conversation, because we need to reach each other and speak to each other. And actually, in my limited experience over recent years of getting people in rooms, logic doesn't get people, because people are working by conflation. And actually, a lot of this stuff is very multifactorial, and it's based on causation, multiple factors. Actually, what people do respond to, it sounds really cheesy and old-fashioned, actually is a good old dose of humanity. Actually, me suspending my judgment when everything in me wants to judge, and actually say, I want to not just get to a place of literacy from illiteracy. I want to move from literacy to comprehension. I want to comprehend the multifactorial things that are going in to driving your behaviors. And actually, most of them are emotional. And then, as all human beings do, we use logic to support most of our emotional feelings about stuff and our preferences. So I think, where does government go? I speak to government a reasonable amount, politicians, etc. And there is a lack of imagination around what to do. And my suggestion is that actually this is a ripe opportunity for some people to dream up some fantastic approaches to inform government, but actually to create a better, safer space. And it's not going to be shutting everybody down, but it's going to somehow be allowing that pressure cooker, which has really, really got some good old pressure in it, some safety valves, and it's going for those people who are the influencers, and actually getting time in a room with them and beginning to have those conversations, and then introducing them to people who they would not normally be able to get to, and those other people would not normally be allowed to talk to them. How the blazes you do it, we're just beginning to do, and it's really tricky, and I've been stabbed in the back many times, but actually connecting people at a good old human level is the first step in a hybrid approach of how to deal with where the stats are taking us, but also where the field notes are suggesting that the danger points are. Thank you very much.
I'm now going to ask William and Paul maybe to pick up on each other's points, and then I'll open it up to the audience, and I might have a question or two, but I will let, William, do you have questions for Paul? Would
Yeah,
you-
well, I mean, yes, I suppose. Now, I'll stand up and ask a couple of questions. Yes, but Paul, you're talking about influencing the influences. You're talking, I mean, I remember with, go back to ISIS, Daesh, and you'll know, and I know that that the great preachers, there was one in America, and they were all in English. The great preachers were all preaching in English, the great extreme preachers. And there was one in America, one in Australia, and 3 of them were in Britain. And you're talking, and one of them, of course, was in prison and was, and then went on with his work from prison, astonishingly, and was extremely successful, and that's astonishing in itself. But so Britain has a history, and now you're saying that 5 of the extreme right leaders are Britain. So Britain has a historical position as being in the lead in creating international hatred. And it's difficult. I mean, we see this phenomena. I mean, we're all culpable ourselves because we live in a society that's much more hate-filled now. And so we're culpable ourselves, I believe, and we easily become hating and driven by hate. We hate Putin, we hate Russia. I mean, the distinction is very hard to draw. And that hatred consumes us, and consumes us passionately. And so we have to watch ourselves, I think. But you're suggesting that this phenomena, these hate leaders, you're going to connect with them. You're not talking about the top 5, or you're talking about, because, and then how? I mean, how do you engage with these people? Because I see the internet as the only way, and that's why it bothers me that we're suppressing the speech on the internet and making, I think, a pressure cooker. And I think we'll see something worse than another Nigel Farage. But you're suggesting, I still don't see the mechanism in your talk. That's my.
Always like saying names because you always want to know who they are. So I think there has to be a multiple approach. So in the same way as, you know, so say, for example, the difference in approach between the police and MI5, you know, MI5 ultimately would disrupt something. The police would gather evidence to prosecute. 2 different approaches to deal with the same thing. They both have their places depending on the level of threat. I think we need all the approaches we can use on the internet to make connection, but also we need those people who can create access into those networks to have conversations as well. Let me talk generally about something very, very specific. So there was one person I met recently who is probably he's probably one of the top people in a particular community connected to the alt-right. And a few days after meeting him, counter-terror police came and arrested some of the people around him. He was too clever to be arrested and all this kind of jazz. And we spent a few hours together and we were talking through all the stuff to do with the far right, etc. And he's prolific online, etc. And people are connecting with him. But we shared a mutual story and made a human connection, which opened up multiple other doors and avenues for me to have conversations with other people. And I think, how do we therefore, can we scale that? So what are the factors we've already got at our disposal that we're using? We're using the internet, whether it's open or closed. We've got to use every means possible. We use disruption tactics, if that's your thing. We use alternate types of memes, if that's your thing. We use, and also in education, there's a massive uptick of young boys in particular. Think of the Andrew Tate stuff in schools around the country being swept up in the manosphere and all the stuff that's taking place. And it is rife in schools across the country. So there's the education bit in school and the connections. I think what I don't see enough of, if I'm going to really put my neck on the block, what I don't see enough of is absolute brutal honesty. And actually, some of the things that people online and on the alt-right are saying have a seed of truth or observation about them that needs to be, yeah, we see that, but that means that. That doesn't mean what you think it means. So they use causation, no correlation. Well, because that's happening, it therefore must mean this. But we don't even say that wealth transfer is taking place. We don't even say there are questions around the efficacy and the business around, you think of some of the conspiracy theories about COVID vaccines. We find it uncomfortable to even talk about what does immigration really mean in a porous, borderless world. What does it mean? Because we're even afraid to bring that up because we might be labeled as one of them. And actually, they can sense that fear. But once you put it on the table, the access point goes up because now people trust you more because you're naming what's taking place. You're not saying what it means. You're just naming that it's happening. And we can see that. Can we dialogue? And that is one of the ways. I think you can do that online. You can do that in school. You can do that face-to-face with influencers. Surely my radical approach to honesty perhaps is unsavory for many, but a way in to break some sort of deadlock.
I'm now going to use my position as chair to ask about the gender, because the internet does amplify hate, and when it incites violence, so the pressure cooker, the valve, but it amplifies that. It gives it an audience that it wouldn't necessarily have at a local, they have now an international audience. And nobody's mentioned the online safety bill, which went through, it's been amended this week. And the amendment was holding tech bosses criminally responsible if they fail to protect the under 18s. Now, that bill is still going to go to the House of Lords, but the discussion today is failures in government approaches. Do you think the online safety bill, and governments around the world are grappling with this problem, how do you protect freedom of speech versus incitement to hate and violence? And my second question will be on gender, but if both William and Paul could.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
There are definite crimes against women and the ultimate raping people, ladies, and I just find that ultimate deterrent is really horrific. Anyway, I just feel it lovely. Thank you very much for your all talks, but I just feel you ought to include women at the moment. I just wanted to say that because they're half the population here, but there are a lot of women who feel that they have a fear of going and walking out and doing things, and you ought to incorporate them as well. I'd just like to say that.
That was going to, second question was going to be about gender imbalance, because that came up in the polling, I think. So we'll touch upon that, but we'll start with the online and then go to gender.
Yeah, Well, it's all kind of related, I guess. The online safety bill, obviously, if we're talking about children and we're talking about the attitudes to children, behavior with regard to children, then and other issues too. It's not just children; it's suicide. There are real issues where real vigilance has to be taken, where things must be suppressed on the internet, and that's clear. Now, it's sometimes though the problem here, in my view, is that in one of the sessions this morning, they were saying it's going to take 10 years for the internet companies to sort this out. I mean, and there are bizarre little campaigns going on in the background. One I heard on Radio 4 just this morning was "Free the Nipple," which is some people who feel that the Facebook automatic takedown of everything with a nipple on it is wrong and even anti-feminist, which was a surprise to me. But and that's done because they use algorithms. They don't actually have people. And some years ago, there were people who were assessing these issues. I'm worried about the online safety bill, but it's almost like a gut worry. I can't argue with it. And yes, if you're going to get the head of Facebook slapped in jail for 10 years, if he or she, it's a he at the moment, I think, misbehaves, then sure. But I really, it troubles me as to where this will end. And I just have to come in on Deborah's and Veronica's second point in relation to this, because women, we live in a society where violent crime is on the increase up every year. Violent crime is going up. I'm talking about Britain now. Crime as a generally is down. Rape is going up year on year, and at least reported incidents of rape. And I come from the Southwest. I used to look at the statistics, and there are obviously peaks for rape and violent crime, and they are particular phenomena. Tourism in the summer, rape goes up. Rape goes up in freshers' weeks at universities. Rape goes, a lot of abuse and family abuse during the COVID period, that's gone up. And we find there's a lot of male on male, by the way, family abuse, because there's a lot of abuse in the homosexual community, certainly in the Southwest. So you get men beating up their male partners. So it's, but their family abuse has gone up. And in terms of rural areas, it's gone up. This is a phenomenon. Violence in our society is on the increase everywhere, all the time. It's a constant of the last decade. We're going up, crawling up, more and more of it. So the dealing with it on the internet, I don't know what to say about this. I think obviously with regard to children, there's an absolute red line. But how do we deal with all these violent people that are getting more violent? And why are they getting more violent? And is it marginalization? What is it? I really don't know. I don't understand what's happening with society, but it is an undeniable fact that violent crime is increasing. Alcohol related, a lot of it perhaps. And I'll just finish. I'm sorry, I'm going off the end, but I will tell you one thing. When I was a prison visitor, I used to visit obviously people. It was a category C jail, and I visited hundreds of prisoners in for violent crime. And I never, in all the years I was visiting as a prison visitor, I never actually visited one person in for violent crime that had a violent crime that wasn't alcohol related. So that's just side, but so I think there's an issue there, but it's not really helping. We don't need to call, but you'll do better.
Can I just make a point though, William? Isn't the internet making unacceptable behavior? It's sort of normalized in these internet forums. And I think that's one of the dangers of the internet, because people connect, they voice these extreme views, and they find out these forums, and certainly Andrew Tate, Paul mentioned, this is a community and it is about education.
I disagree with you. I think that what is, all right, if you want a source for violent crime in Britain, you look at the violence on the television. And the violence on television, you have torture on television in James Bond movies, you know, with the whatever in a sock. That's on mainstream television that children are watching this extreme violence on television. And it is part of our society. I would argue, I cannot deal with some of the violence. I almost, God help us, it's getting so now the movies are getting so violent. And I find, I mean, it's too realistic and it's too disturbing. And I've walked out of movies. And because of that, I think that the internet, you can deal with it. You can have an argument, you can have a discussion, providing it's not violent porn or something, which does need to be suppressed, but you can deal with violent people. It's one forum on which you can say, hey, this is wrong, and you can react, and you can comment on Facebook posts. And it's a real opportunity to engage with people and say, come on now, guys. But you can't engage with the stuff that's being thrashed down children's throats on mainstream television. I think that's much more dangerous, if you want to, just being opinionated, but sorry.
So education, I think, is key, because it's clearly not all working because these forums are proliferating. But Paul, can we, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it snappy so they get bored of my voice. So to the first one, the internet's still like the Wild West. And we are, you know, people cleverer than me who analyze these things. We're a decade away from dealing with it. We've got internet companies, platforms that this content finds its way onto, lobbying governments, involved with all sorts of shareholder deals with business, very clever legal ease people around them. It's porous. It operates across borders, and it's, you know, you only have to put a VPN, virtual private network, on your phone. You can go through something else and you can access information on all sorts of regular web, let alone dark websites. And you can post fairly anonymous and engage to your heart's content as whatever you want to be. So I think it's going to take some time, and clearly there are different ways of doing it. Whether this bill is going to actually make a difference to the real issue, or I remember when it's not something of equivalence, but I remember when the GDPR bill went through, and that was to stop the abuses basically of big tech companies taking people's data and, you know, selling stuff or pressurizing them. Actually, the people that end up on the receiving end of that are small organizations that are trying to run business and charities for the sake of the good of other people, and they get tied up with GDPR legislation, and the big tech companies, they're not getting the fines that these people are proportionately. And that was interesting to watch. So I wonder, with the internet side of things, whether the big tech companies that it's aimed to stop that stuff on the platforms, actually, they're never going to get smacked. Other people will get smacked, and maybe they should get smacked as well. But I don't think it's going to deal with the problem. It's going to be part of it, of a solution, but it's just mealy bits and bobs. When it comes to the stats around women, I said to my wife, Liz, before I left today, I said, it's extraordinary, the inbound stuff I get from alt-right activists and various things that they want me to be a part of so I can have a conversation. the single highest amount of hatred, dirt, filth, stuff that makes my blood boil is always around women, always around women. Beyond anything else, you can cut all the race stuff out, all the religion stuff out, all the class stuff out, all the elite stuff out. Whether that's there or not, it's always a woman. 9 times out of 10, it's violence, either psychological violence, sexual violence, racial violence, religious violence, whatever, towards a woman. And I just, maybe this is too simplistic, but one of the things that I've noticed about the kinds of people who engage in that kind of activity, whether they be a lot ex-military, a lot ex, whatever they are, they've lost a sense of identity, the worth of humanity, purpose, all the things that seem like really soft skills and soft things to have, but ultimately have hard outcomes. The loss of that sense of identity and purpose, there's that tension that comes up, and it seems to find people want, if you ever read any of René Girard's stuff on mimetic theory, there always needs to be a scapegoat. And for whatever reason, women in particular are the universal scapegoat in any of these contexts. And I just think we probably need some decent male voices, as it were, actually giving a different narrative. Whether that's going to work, I don't know.
I would like to open it up to the audience, and I've noticed we've actually got more, I think, women in the audience, which is refreshing. So, ladies, who wants to? And can you introduce yourselves? And if you can say who you would like to address the question to, please.
Yeah. So I'll go first because we argued it out between us. At first, I kind of wanted to respond with a bit of something I've just seen in my own circles, and that is I spend a lot of time in the K-pop community, which is mainly young females, and I think it's really interesting your point about memes. That lately I've been seeing some excellent leftist memes through the lens of K-pop, so there's some hope there. Yeah, absolutely. We'll do a really good Marxist one the other day. I was sending it to all my friends that, no, don't listen to it, but check it out. Secondly, just one of the things that you said earlier, Paul, resonated with me is I recently watched It Ain't Half Racist, Mum, which was, you know, the documentary by Stuart Hall as part of the Open Door series on the BBC. And in that, they gave a bit of an overview of, you know, the BBC's kind of right-leaning history, which kind of reflects, you know, quite a right-wing history of the country in many senses. And they were talking about how the National Front was given space on the BBC to talk. And, you know, Michael Swan was saying it's vital to display the rhetoric of the National Front. Who knows, exposure may even persuade them towards their tune. And Stuart Hall responded to this saying, what he's really saying is that extreme racists have become part of the balance and acceptable point of view within the spectrum of political opinions. Can you imagine if, say, the rhetoric of Black revolutionaries was given the same ground? And I just wonder, like, how that fits into this kind of idea of, you know, allowing that conversation to happen. Like, how do we balance it? Is that something you've considered? Because, you know, like I said, there's a long history of giving these voices a platform. So,
shall we take? Maybe we'll take two questions. Thanks. So if you could introduce yourself.
sorry, I'm Sarah. I work at Wiley.
Hi, my name is Kyra Lee. I'm a law student. My question is also for Paul. William, you answered all the questions I had during your speech. It was very good. Thank you. No, you good. Also good. My question to you, Paul, is you mentioned how lots of the ideologies that these alt-right individuals have a grain of truth. And I believe you, because, you know, we see phrases like white guilt thrown around, and we see big things made, for example, in the States, we saw Black Lives Matter, but then we see like an opioid crisis in lots of states. So how do you respond when you have these alt-right individuals saying, you know, for example, as a white man, oh, we are not, you know, we are not recognized? And because I suppose in the States in particular, we do see a kind of government push leftwards, and we kind of do see lots of people in power talking about these issues such as, you know, white guilt, all these things that kind of demonize white men and not giving them a space to speak, which obviously creates this pressure. So when you're on the ground, how do you respond to these individuals?
Cool.
I'm just letting you get your steps in for the day. I've got 10,000 by the end of it. Okay, so Kira first, then Sarah second. Yeah. So on the white guilt thing, of course, I'm in a brilliant position. Okay, so I was brought up on council estates in Bristol. Yeah, my mum and dad, it's being recorded, but I will say some stuff. My mum and dad ran a halfway house for West Indian lads on their way to prison in St. Paul's, Montpellier, at the front end of the race riots. My mum was, two of the black lads tried to rape my mum in front of me, and my dad dealt with them. He was former special forces, so they didn't really stand a chance. I was terrified of black men. I was just afraid of growing up. I didn't know why. It's because of that, and I could have easily become racist. But I still did better than my black mates at school. So when they say, oh, well, you know, it's white privilege, white guilt, I say, actually, I've got a felt experience of this. I had the same education, the same background, born in the same area, went to the same school, made similar decisions. It's not all totally equivalent. I only had to overcome working class. If I don't really want to overcome it, but that's my glass ceiling. I said, my mate had to overcome both working class and black. And I said, it's easy for you to say, oh, well, white privilege and all this, that, and the other. I said, I just have more white opportunity because I was already in the power camp, even if I was from a working class setting. Okay, those people above me, you know, had greater power if you fully buy into the Marxist philosophy idea, etc. But I said, I had one barrier to overcome. You had two. That's enough for me to know I'm privileged. And when they say, well, you know, white lives matter as well as black lives. And I say to them, my black mates who are saying Black Lives Matter aren't saying that white lives don't matter. They're just saying at this particular point in history, because of all the causal factors that have led to this place, there's something we need to focus on. It's not, hopefully it won't have to be forever. It can be addressed. And I just take the sting out of it saying, look, I know what it's like. And also, Black Lives Matter is not saying that white lives don't matter. It's just saying Black Lives Matter in particular at this particular time, because the history leads to this point where we need to change things. It's not saying that white lives don't matter. And that's lazy thinking. That's correlation thinking, not causal thinking. So to your point, Sarah, around giving platforms, basically pros and cons for white nationalists and nationalists, actually, I like a bit of risk, me. That's why I do what I do. And provided you have somebody who can speak in sound bites, because we're talking the media world here, provided you can have somebody who speaks in sound bites, and whether we like it or not, can be TV savvy, give some charisma and all that kind of stuff, albeit put somebody up against a National Front or far-right activist, but they better be blooming good. Because a lot of these people are, as you say, great at memes, great at sound bites, great at quick whipping up emotions. You need that on the counter as well, because we have to first engage the emotion and then settle the emotion, then bring the logical argument in. So you've got to have, it's a risky strategy. It worked with the National Front, but actually after that interview, the access to the National Front on the website was so much, it crashed the National Front website. It was only because other stuff came out about Nick Griffin, who was on that particular show. I saw it. It was only because other stuff that came out that started to destroy the National Front, actually. But after that, it rocketed, and that's what will happen. So we just got to, if we're going to play that game, we've got to have some really good people in front of camera with a bit of a twinkle in their eye and a bit of fun as well to get the steam out. Cool.
William, do you have any comment?
A small comment in regard to
No,
that.
absolutely.
Sarah's point. I mean, yeah, I too watched that interview. Question time, wasn't it? And actually, I don't know whether Sarah, you saw it, but it was interesting. I think it was better that it happened than not happened. And it dealt with, they were quite respectful of him, but they dealt quite firmly with the points that were made. It was a good discussion. I think it's better that that's brought out rather than suppressed. Over time, of course, within a very brief period of time, all those National Front followers joined UKIP, and National Front has been, I would say, totally absorbed. I mean, the mainstream National Front has been totally absorbed, or was totally absorbed in UKIP. And were very much present in UKIP, very, very much so. So that's an interesting phenomenon.
We've
Sorry.
got, yeah, yeah. Can someone take to the lady?
You're 8,000 steps.
I think you both have really good points. So this is a question to both of you, because you're both talking about being
Can you
open.
introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm Andrea. I'm a student from London. I'm originally from Denmark, but I have a conversation. I have an idea that I think your conversations are really important, these open ones, but yet there's still conversations where people are like going straight out, talking to us women really negatively on the internet, threatening people of, you know, there should also, I just want to see how would you balance that people that are women, people who are Black, don't feel threatened on the internet? Because yes, we should be open, and yes, we shouldn't regulate everybody, because that doesn't really have a solution on the long side of things. But should we also be subject to go on the internet and be threatened? How do we balance this out? I'm just asking. Yeah.
Who we have? We haven't got much time left, so sort of 1 minute sort of replies on any thoughts that women, minorities, it goes back to the point that governments are grappling with that fine line, protecting free speech, but protecting others from violence and hatred.
I don't think it can be stopped very easily, just because of the way the internet works. It's overly democratized. So it doesn't matter what government legislation's in place, there's too much democracy. One of the things that I do is, and this isn't the answer for everybody, but it's the answer, is an answer for me. I just don't access the internet in the same way that I used to, not interested. And that doesn't solve the question. That doesn't answer the question, but I'm not interested. No, I'm just saying that I shouldn't be, that I don't. And I know some other of my boyfriends and girlfriends are the same. They say, actually, we use the internet rather than surf the internet, in as much as we just go and access that bit of information for that particular thing, whether it's research, shopping, hoovering up media. And we're just not interested in anything else. It's a rubbish answer, but that's how I'm doing it.
I'm going to wrap up now. Unfortunately, it's coming to the end. I'm sure our speakers will be around to take further questions. And I'll wrap up by saying I think education is key, and that we all, whatever our gender, whatever our color, whatever our religion, have the right to be protected from violence and hatred on the internet, and governments and society in general are going to have to grapple with this question. But education does seem to be key. That's where it starts. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I bring to the end this panel. Thank you very much.